Hi, I'm Karen from SessionLab and welcome to Behind the Sessions, a video series of interviews with practicing facilitators who are going to show us how they design and plan their agendas for workshops, trainings, events and for conferences too. So in today's episode, I'll be chatting with my colleague here at SessionLab, Deborah Rim Moiso, who's also an IEF endorsed facilitator. And Deb's going to show us how she uses SessionLab, along with techniques like backcasting and impromptu networking, to design a more interactive experience for her conference participants. So thank you for joining me today, Deb, and over to you to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Thank you, Karen. What a lovely introduction. So I am Deborah Rim Moiso. I am based in central Italy, close to the beautiful city of Perugia. I'm a freelance facilitator, and I also write about facilitation, including for SessionLab, and I teach and train, especially youth, to be facilitators. Today, we're going to talk about participatory conferences, and this is a topic that I really, it's dear to heart because I really enjoy it when I get asked to add some participation to interactivities to large conferences. And I've had the opportunity to do it quite a lot in the past few years. So I'm very happy to be here and reflect about how to do that with you.
Yeah, thank you, Deb, for the introduction. And could you tell us a little bit more about what makes a conference different to a workshop and what kind of challenges might come up when designing for a large conference?
So I think what makes a large conference challenging and different is that I have many needs in the room, because there is at least both a strong need for, getting information. So we go to a conference or we decide to organize a conference so that we can share updated information with people. And at the same time, there's a strong need for networking. Even just taking those two, they seem to clash. Like, am I delivering information to my participants in a conventional, somebody speaking their slides way? Or am I giving them the opportunity to network? And what unfortunately often happens is the opportunity to network gets pushed to the coffee breaks. And then the rest of the conference is satisfying that need for information. But they're both there, so we can do a lot. And I think that's what makes a conference an interesting challenge for facilitation and different from a workshop. If it's a workshop, it's probably clear. We're either here to network or we're here to do something or to design a product, while the conference is kind of a fuzzy place. What do we really want when we go to a conference?
So with that in mind, could you share an example of a conference that you've designed for and some specific constraints or challenges that came up when you went through that process?
One of them was here in Italy. Amazing venue. We were inside the Italian Parliament, which that was quite an achievement professionally to be facilitating inside the Parliament. It was about 150 people coming together for a kickoff of a large Horizon EU project on water availability and water scarcity. Okay, so that was the context, and I was really excited to be called in, and then I saw the program. So the program had been prepared already, and although honestly and from the bottom of their hearts, the organizers wanted a participatory conferences, they had dedicated 0 minutes in the program to facilitate activities. And to me, the idea of sharing a space for, say, a day with all these other people in the same industry and not having many opportunities to interact with them feels like a waste. There's a lot of resources going into that, travel time, expenses, hotels. And then we are there, and if all we get is what could have been a webinar, I think that's really a waste.
Yeah, it definitely shouldn't be like a webinar. A conference is an experience where people get to come together and actually meet each other and work on something, or even if it's networking. So yeah, and if you can take a look at an agenda example, how might you approach designing the agenda, perhaps using SessionLab?
Yeah, so how do I approach designing an agenda for a large conference? So, as with every workshop or agenda, I'm usually starting with what are the things that are non-negotiable, which are usually a date, a topic, a location, and in this case, often some speakers are already set, or at least there will be a welcome from the organizers, and the organizers probably have some ideas of some people who should speak and who need to bring some content. And I'm all for it. I don't want to sound like I'm not. Some content is important. If not, we're just if 120 people are all just discussing whatever they want to discuss, they can do that in open space, but there's a risk that it gets very confusing. So it's nice to have some speakers to focus attention on what is important to the organizers who, as you said, have spent a lot of work doing that. So I'll start with the non-negotiables. And what that looks like on an agenda is setting the start date, the end date, the lunch time, which is super important in this kinds of things, coordination with the catering staff and with the hotel or logistics staff is super important. So I'll start by setting those things and seeing where there is space. Sometimes there is very little space left. There's a consulting aspect to facilitation of starting to question what their intentions actually are, because often people don't know. They will organize an event and they're not really sure why. And it takes a little bit of drawing out about what could we do with this event? What are the actual learning objectives or objectives? And then based on that, I'll pick activities that can work for a large group of people.
Great. So we've got all these blocks together and we've put in the non-negotiables there. So next, you've found that you've got some space, or maybe you don't have quite as much as you thought. What kind of techniques or methods would you add into this experience for a larger audience?
So there's impromptu networking from liberating structures. This is a method, a facilitation method, in which at the start of something, I will ask people to find two other people they hopefully don't know or know less about, and start having a little 5-10 minute chat about what brings them to the conference. And I mean, it's strange as a facilitator to say that's something I will always do, but I'll go with that. I think that is something I will just always try to introduce. It is so helpful. Something people might not realize is that it is also extremely beneficial for the speaker that comes after that. So I generally introduce impromptu networking before we start, and I'm doing air quotes because that's silly. At that point, we've started. We have started the moment that the invitations arrived. But let's say before we start, I'll have a little microphone and I'll say, okay, before we begin, before we hear from our speaker, or to begin, which is actually more honest, why don't you find two people you don't know and we have a little chat, and people generally very much enjoy this. It creates already a different setting in the room, and it changes expectations a bit. Oh, I'm going to be talking to other people, and it's super beneficial for the speakers. So one thing that has happened to me a lot is that speakers or professors, if this is a university event, will come up and say something like, "This was such an exceptional group of people. They asked so many questions." Now, that's cute, but that's not what happened. What happened is that we have facilitated a situation in which people felt comfortable expressing themselves. They have spoken at the beginning with somebody, and that and other things that I might do throughout supports them in being more present and participatory, and speakers like that. Uh, Q&As that have been in an event that have been facilitated are not the kind of Q&As where, does anybody have any questions? And nobody says anything. That never happens to me because I've given them the opportunity before to express themselves and to feel that it's comfortable to ask questions, that we are in a space where it's okay to not pretend to be the super expert that knows everything. Yeah.
I really love that. And it does show the power of connection before content, which you've spoken about quite a lot in facilitation trainings that we've had together. And it shows how impromptu networking from liberating structures can facilitate that. So you've opened your agenda design there. And then let's move a little bit later on. Is there a way that you can re-engage people? Maybe share some examples of when you've got lots of time and maybe when time's a little bit tight. So how would you move forward with that?
One thing I like to do is leverage lunchtime, not to do structured activities during lunchtime, because that's, I think, very rude to people. They can have their lunchtime. But one thing I've liked to introduce is this activity that I call bowls of questions, and you can find it on the SessionLabs library. I put it there, so it's definitely there. It's called bowls of questions. And the idea is to have bowls on the various tables during coffee breaks or lunch breaks that contain handwritten, I like it to be handwritten, I think it's a nice touch, questions that are related to the topic of the conference but are more personal in nature. For example, at the conference at the European Parliament and at the Italian Parliament about water scarcity, I filled the bowl with questions like, when did you learn how to swim? Or tell a story that is related to your relationship with rivers. And also things that are a little bit edgier. Have you ever been involved in a natural disaster in having to do with water? People can pick these questions or not. They can choose to engage with them or not. What I usually do is I'll start doing it and just pick a few and then what happens is the two or three people really like this kind of activity and we'll kind of spread it throughout. And the benefit of that is that it allows to create a bit of a deeper conversation, but in a very informal way. And you don't need any time. You just need bowls. Okay. So that's the kind of thing I might do. Now, moving to more structured activities in the afternoon. It's usually in the afternoon. So there's all the work of dividing people in groups and giving them something to do. And I think a recent example that we might talk about is when I used backcasting recently. That was cool. So I'll tell you what that is. So in this case, it was a networking conference, European agency. The topic was forestry, and it was really multi-stakeholder. So when it's really multi-stakeholder, so there were researchers, practitioners, academics, professionals from the industry, it can be a bit tricky to find activities that resonate with everybody because they have very different meanings and things they want to do. And also there was the topic of the conference was basically networking. It was essential that they talk to one another and discuss the industry, but it's not like there was a clear, we need to have a decision, for example, because these people all work in the same field, but in very different contexts. So what do you do then? What can unite people? What is a question that everybody's curious about and wants to explore together? And I thought it could be about the future, so visions for their industry, for the future, because then if you have a magnetic, interesting vision for the future, then everybody is going to work towards it in their own industries in their own way. And so to do that, divided people in groups, gave them clear instructions about that. We had different tables all around, and then on each table they had canvases using this methodology called backcasting, which is first sharing a vision. What would a thriving future mean for you? And then going back, if that's 2035, what would it be like in 2030? What do we need to do next year to achieve it? And what is the next step that you want to take? So I think many facilitators love backcasting because it allows to work on future scenarios but in a very soft way. You can do it. I think we took 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, and it leads naturally to the next actionable point, which is what I love for people to leave a conference with is what am I going to do next?
Nice. So you've got your agenda design coming together now. And if you have to share with like a client or with participants or anybody who's part of the conference, how does SessionLab help with that?
How SessionLab helps with all of that in so many ways. So far we've talked about methodologies. So one way that SessionLab helps is that the methodologies are there in the library and I can pick them out and put them in my design and that helps explain them to the client without me having to rewrite the instructions. But also, I think specifically for large conferences, what it really helps to coordinate all those different actors that I've been touching upon. So you have facilitators, you have organizing team, logistics team, the locations team. This often is a hotel or conference hall or things like that. And so I think in large conferences, it becomes really important to be able to add columns. And I'm really liking that we can now change the name of the columns. In this case, for say backcasting, I had the method. Okay, all I needed to know was backcasting, but then I had the explanation for the method, which my host and organizers needed to know so they knew what I was doing because they need to feel safe and know what I'm doing. Then I had the materials we needed so that the materials logistics team would know what I needed to facilitate that session. Instructions for co-facilitators who were milling around the tables and helping people so that they specifically knew what I wanted them to look out for, to draw people in the conversation, but also leave them alone at times. And then I had instructions it was a hotel, so for the hotel about which rooms we would be using and tables. So it is great for large conferences to keep all that information together.
Yeah, it really does help with all of that little bits and keeping everything together in the right place when you're coordinating for an event of this size. And I have another question for you. We're talking about methods and techniques. So, is there a technique that you can think of that you've used recently that the results surprised you in some way?
A poster session, which is a very typical, very standard thing to do in academic circles, where you have posters presenting projects, and then people go around, and there's many different ways to facilitate that, so that people can have conversations around those projects. And we did what I called, I don't know if it has a name, but I called it a poster walk. So I had time set so that people could present their projects, but also go around and leave comments on post-its about other people's projects. And I gave a lot of spaciousness and time for that. So when we were, doing the agenda, I was clicking plus on SessionLab and adding time to this. And I had to defend that a little bit with organizers because they felt it didn't need so much time. But that was it's a nice way of mixing structure and unstructured. So it was structured enough, but it was also people were free to go to the poster they were interested in and have conversations about that with people they wanted to have conversations with. And what surprised me was a researcher came up to me at the end and he said that was the best poster session he had ever been to. But it was also sad and surprising because what is his experience usually? If what seems to me quite standard, I mean, walking around talking about projects was the best thing that ever happened to him at a conference. How boring was his previous experience, and how much work do we need to do as facilitators and organizers to make sure that this becomes normal, that having a good experience at a conference becomes normal and not something to go gush to the head facilitator about. Although, thank you if you're listening. That was nice of you.
Yeah, wow, it's wonderful to have that feedback, but at the same time, like, oh, that should be the experience everyone has all of the time when they're doing this kind of work. If we now take a look at some tips that you might want to share with someone who's setting out to design and facilitate their first ever large conference, what would you suggest?
Have some like key points that you can refer to when you are explaining why participation is important and why interactivity is important. I think go back basics, connection before content. So it's very, very helpful to start a large conference with an interactive activity. Even just the very simple things of starting by asking people, if you are from France, raise your hand. If you have traveled here from Spain, raise your hand, and just allowing people to visualize who else is in the room with them. If you are studying this topic, stand up and take a look around. These are the people who are studying this topic. Or if you are in this industry, stand up and take that kind of thing that can just help people see who else is in the room with them at the beginning. So do something at the beginning, I guess is my main tip.
Yeah, great tip. As always, connection before content. So do something at the start is a ideal tip for a large conference of this size. And just taking you back a little bit more to talk about SessionLab, is there anything that has you found particularly useful or surprisingly useful when designing an agenda?
Apart from the, known, you probably know these if you've ever used it, functionalities like dragging and dropping and picking methods from the library. Creating your own personal library is super useful because then if you get asked, and you hopefully get asked to do it again, you can go to your personal library and take that method that you invented specifically for that conference and using it again. That's super useful. And for all the planning, I mean, of course, I'm going to say, try out SessionLab. If it's a large conference, you're going to need to share information with a bunch of people. So the collaboration tools there are really handy. You're going to be changing your agenda, not at the last moment for large conferences, but you're going to be changing your agenda a bunch of times, and to be able to just switch the time around and change the time of the breaks, because for the nth time the caterer said that they cannot come at 12:30, they have to come at 1, and you have to change that, and that can be really painful if you're trying to do it in Excel or in a table. So try that out. But from my recent experience with these larger conference, it's adding columns and renaming them and being able to hide them or print them in PDF printouts. That really comes in handy for this specific user case, because you have so many different moving parts, and you need to communicate some things to some people and other things to other people. So you need to print only the materials for the materials group, and to print out only the instructions for logistics for the hotel people, or the venue people. And so to be able to create an additional information column, then call it information for the venue. And when you go to a printout, just print that out in PDF and send it to them, is super useful, because I still can see everything, but I can select that and send it to the different people who don't need to know everything. They just need to know that I need 10 tables in room B at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, it avoids all of that overwhelm. You've got all the information you need and you can give it all to the right people. And yeah, it's very useful for organization. Absolutely. And yeah, I think, oh yeah, if you revisit the same venue, maybe you have all that information so you could easily, copy and paste that over, or just, reuse that session. It's quite easy to do.
Yes, and so is color coding. That file for that conference ended up being pretty big, as you can imagine. So having selecting text and putting it bright red for, in this case, it was, "We still don't know what time lunch is on day 2."
Yeah.
All caps, bright red, make sure that everybody knows that this is something we need to know. Yeah.
This has been great. Thank you so, so much. It's really wonderful tips, sharing how you design an agenda for large conferences and your experience with people who are just starting out or people who might just need a refresh of how to do this sort of work. So, yeah, I'd love for you just to share where people can find more about you and your work as well.
Oh my, I wasn't expecting that. Oh my, okay, thank you. Yes, so I have a very unusual name and surname, which I'm sure shows up in various places. So I'm very easy to find because of that, because I'm the only Deborah Moiso in the world. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's the only social network I use. But as we've mentioned, so I write for the blog of SessionLab. So if you go to sessionlab.com/blog and you find any article that I've written, and then you click on my name, you can see all the other articles that I've written if you are interested in that. There's one recent one actually about exactly what we've been discussing, so how to organize large events. There's also some like introductory guides to what facilitation is and what do facilitators do, so you can find those there. And I try and be quite available. So if you need tips or ideas and you're maybe starting out, let's encourage younger facilitators. We have not enough of those. Do reach out to me on LinkedIn, and if I can, I will, share tips and ideas and all that. Also, if I don't, join IAF, the International Association of Facilitators, which I'm a part of, because they have a wonderful mentoring program where there can also be somebody else giving you tips and ideas. That's also a really nice thing to do. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb. And for people watching, I will share in the comments below the links that Deb has mentioned and some of the techniques too. If you have any experience of your own to share, any tips, tricks, experiences, then please add them below in the comments too. Until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.